Shadow Bonnie stands as one of the most unsettling supernatural manifestations in the Five Nights at Freddy's universe, and when examined through the lens of agony rather than technology, his existence becomes far more coherent within the spiritual rules of the series. Instead of being understood as a glitch or corrupted data, he can be interpreted as a being formed from concentrated suffering, an entity born not from machinery, but from emotional trauma so intense that it takes shape. The concept of agony is central to understanding many unexplained phenomena in this story. Throughout the series, it becomes increasingly clear that powerful emotions, especially pain, fear, and rage, do not simply fade after death. They linger. They bind to metal. They saturate environments. They can even animate inanimate objects. If remnant is the binding agent of souls to machinery, agony is the fuel that strengthens and distorts that bond. Shadow Bonnie fits more naturally into this framework than into any technological explanation. His first appearance in Five Nights at Freddy's 2 already sets him apart from standard haunted animatronics. He does not move through rooms. He does not follow patrol routes. He materializes suddenly, silently, and unnaturally. His presence feels less like a possessed robot walking toward the player and more like an intrusion of something intangible into physical space. This aligns with the idea of agony manifesting independently of a specific body. Unlike Freddy or Bonnie, who contain the spirits of murdered children, Shadow Bonnie does not appear confined within a suit. He is the silhouette itself. He is the absence of detail, the outline of trauma without a visible corpse inside. The visual design reinforces this interpretation. He is completely black, a void shaped like Toy Bonnie, with only pale eyes breaking through the darkness. This lack of texture suggests he is not a physical animatronic coated in shadow, but rather a shadow given shape. Agony in the Five Nights at Freddy's universe often distorts or darkens its host. When suffering accumulates over years, multiple murders, repeated cover-ups, dismantling of haunted suits, children trapped in metal prisons, it could logically condense into something more abstract. Shadow Bonnie may be the residue of repeated violence centered around the Bonnie suits, especially Spring Bonnie, which William Afton used to lure his victims. There is symbolic weight in that connection. Bonnie, particularly the yellow Spring Bonnie suit, is directly tied to the earliest murders. If agony clings to places and objects associated with extreme suffering, then the identity of Bonnie would be saturated in it. Shadow Bonnie could represent the concentrated emotional aftermath of those crimes, a spiritual echo rather than a singular child. Instead of containing one victim, he may embody the collective pain of several. His role in the hidden minigame of Five Nights at Freddy's 3 further supports the agony-based interpretation. In that sequence, the player controls Shadow Bonnie to help free the spirits of the children, contributing to the good ending. This action is important because it suggests Shadow Bonnie is not malicious in the traditional sense. He does not attack out of confusion like the possessed animatronics. He seems connected to the spiritual plane where the children's souls linger. If he is made of agony, then he exists on the same emotional frequency as the trapped spirits. Agony does not always equate to evil. It can also seek resolution. When suffering is acknowledged or confronted, it can dissipate. Shadow Bonnie aiding in the freeing of souls could represent agony guiding spirits toward closure. This interpretation also explains why he does not behave like a typical ghost. Golden Freddy appears as a vengeful spirit with a strong personality and focused rage. The puppet acts with protective intention, guiding souls into animatronics. Shadow Bonnie, however, lacks individual motive. He feels impersonal. That impersonality is consistent with agony as a force rather than a personality. He is an emotional phenomenon. He is what remains when violence has no outlet. The fact that he appears rarely and unpredictably strengthens the sense that he is tied to emotional conditions rather than physical mechanics. Agony may not be constantly active. It may flare up in moments when memory, fear, or spiritual unrest intensify. His sudden materialization in the office during Five Nights at Freddy's 2 could symbolize the building pressure of unresolved trauma within that location. That restaurant was already layered with past tragedy, previous murders, malfunctioning facial recognition systems, and the presence of the puppet. It was a pressure chamber of unresolved pain. In such an environment, an entity formed of agony would naturally surface. There is also an interesting contrast between Shadow Bonnie and Shadow Freddy. If both are manifestations of agony, they may represent different emotional currents. Shadow Freddy often appears connected to manipulation or leading animatronics toward dismantling. Shadow Bonnie, by contrast, assists in liberation. This could imply that agony is not morally fixed. It reflects the circumstances that created it. One shadow might embody betrayal and violence. The other might embody sorrow and the desire for release. Both originate from suffering, but suffering can fracture into different expressions. Importantly, Shadow Bonnie's lack of a confirmed identity is not a weakness in this theory but a strength. If he were tied to one named child, his mystery would shrink. By remaining undefined, he retains the sense of being larger than any single tragedy. The Five Nights at Freddy's story is not about one isolated murder. It is about a cycle of harm repeated across years. Shadow Bonnie may be the spiritual accumulation of that cycle. In this sense, he represents something deeply thematic, the idea that violence leaves stains that cannot simply be covered up. Companies can close restaurants, suits can be dismantled, buildings can burn down, but agony persists. It lingers in the shadows, waiting for acknowledgement. Shadow Bonnie is that lingering presence. He is not metal, not circuitry, not a trapped child inside a costume. He is what happens when suffering saturates a place so completely that it gains form. By interpreting Shadow Bonnie as a being made of agony, his abstract behavior, minimal design, and spiritual role all align naturally within the series' rules. He becomes less of a puzzle piece to categorize and more of a thematic embodiment of the franchise's core truth. That pain, once created, does not simply disappear. It casts a shadow. Shadow Bonnie and Shadow Freddy are often grouped together because of their similar appearances. But when examined through the lens of agony as a supernatural force, they begin to feel like two distinct manifestations of the same emotional source, rather than identical mysteries. Both are shadowy versions of established characters. Both appear rarely and without conventional movement patterns. Both feel less like haunted animatronics and more like spiritual distortions. However, their behavior and narrative roles suggest they embody different expressions of accumulated suffering. Shadow Freddy appears most prominently in Five Nights at Freddy's 2, slumped in the parts and service room, motionless and silent. Unlike standard animatronics, he does not actively hunt the player in a normal pattern. His presence feels wrong in a different way. He sits, almost like an omen. In Five Nights at Freddy's 3's retro minigames, a shadowy golden bear figure, widely interpreted as Shadow Freddy, leads the classic animatronics to the safe room where William Afton dismantles them. This detail is critical. If Shadow Freddy is indeed guiding them, then he is indirectly assisting in the destruction of the haunted suits. That action aligns him more closely with the chaos and manipulation surrounding William's crimes. If both shadow entities are born from agony, then Shadow Freddy may represent a darker, more corrupted strain of it. Agony in this universe is not passive sadness. It is intense, unresolved emotional energy. When repeated murders occur in the same locations, when children are betrayed by someone they trusted, when spirits are trapped for years without peace, that suffering does not remain neutral. It can curdle into something predatory. Shadow Freddy's behavior in luring animatronics could symbolize agony turning inward, perpetuating the cycle of harm rather than resolving it. Visually, Shadow Freddy differs slightly from Shadow Bonnie. He appears as a dark purple or blackened version of Golden Freddy, a character already heavily associated with vengeance and spiritual intensity. That connection is important. Golden Freddy is widely understood to house one of the most vengeful spirits in the series. If Shadow Freddy resembles that form but stripped of identifiable personality, he may be the residual emotional discharge from extreme rage. Not the child's consciousness itself, but the leftover emotional force radiating from it. Shadow Bonnie, by contrast, demonstrates a more ambiguous or even restorative role in Five Nights at Freddy's 3. In the hidden minigame where the player controls him, he assists in freeing the children's spirits. This suggests that not all agony manifests destructively. Some forms of suffering seek resolution. Shadow Bonnie may embody sorrow and remembrance, while Shadow Freddy embodies bitterness and perpetuation of violence. Both originate from trauma, but trauma fractures. It does not produce a single outcome. Another key distinction lies in how each one feels thematically. Shadow Bonnie often appears abruptly and causes a system crash or forced reset in the second game, almost as if reality cannot sustain his presence for long. He intrudes, he destabilizes, but he does not directly attack. Shadow Freddy, in contrast, feels more integrated into the environment. He waits, he watches. In the minigames, he leads. There is an intentionality implied there, even if it is not fully explained. If we consider the emotional geography of the series, the Freddy and Bonnie suits carry different symbolic weight. Bonnie, particularly Spring Bonnie, is directly tied to William Afton's role as a predator. Freddy, especially Golden Freddy, is tied to the most intense spiritual retaliation. If agony attaches itself to objects and identities associated with suffering, then the shadows of these figures would naturally differ. Shadow Bonnie could represent the echo of betrayal and innocence lost, while Shadow Freddy could represent the echo of vengeance and festering rage. Importantly, neither shadow entity appears confined within a physical body the way the other animatronics are. They do not creak with servos or shamble through hallways. They materialize. This suggests they are not spirits inhabiting endoskeletons but emotional imprints strong enough to assume recognizable shapes. Agony, when concentrated over years of repeated tragedy, may no longer require metal to anchor it. It becomes self-sustaining. There is also something deeply symbolic in the fact that they are shadows of mascots meant to entertain children. Freddy and Bonnie were designed to bring joy, to sing, to perform. Their shadow counterparts represent what those cheerful facades concealed. The restaurants projected happiness while hiding horror behind safe room walls. The shadows are the truth bleeding through the performance. They are what the bright stage lights fail to erase. When looking at both entities together, it becomes clear that they expand the supernatural rules of the series. The early games establish that souls can possess animatronics. The shadow figures push that further by suggesting that emotions alone, without a clearly defined spirit, can take form. This deepens the tragedy of the narrative. It means the damage done by William Afton was not limited to the children he killed. The pain itself became alive. In the end, Shadow Bonnie and Shadow Freddy are not simply alternate skins of familiar characters. They are manifestations of what the franchise is truly about, consequences that linger. Shadow Bonnie may represent agony-seeking release, guiding spirits toward freedom. Shadow Freddy may represent agony trapped in a loop, replaying betrayal and destruction. Together, they show that suffering in this universe does not disappear when a body dies or a building closes. It condenses. It waits. And sometimes, it steps out of the darkness in a shape you almost recognize.